so we're going to do it differently, but rather we have a well-defined way of putting software in there, of checking, of doing continuous ATOs. Of part of our process is that we know what's the frequency at which we're going to update the different pieces of software. I think when you look at the...
And what they'd love to say to us is, oh, you need to update it frequently, and we need to be sole source. And of course, we can't share our source code with anyone else so that they might be able to participate in that update. So how do I break through that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and and I'll let Dan say a little bit about it. I do think that you have to think about where the pieces of software are going to come from, and they don't all have to come necessarily from one manufacturer. Look at the software.
We'll have to wake Lockheed Martin up with smelling salts. That not every update to the F-35 has to come through Lockheed Martin.
Yeah. So first, let me just add some operational context to this. Sometimes I think that in peacetime, it's hard to understand how important delivering software updates is. But if you just look at the conflict playing out in the Ukraine, one of the things is you see Ukrainian radios only last about 3 weeks before some countermeasure comes along and they have to reprogram the radio or change a waveform. We see the Excalibur munition, its targeting system dropped from 70% effectiveness to 6% effectiveness over a matter of a few months as new EW mechanisms came out. If we expect our major weapons system programs to follow these waterfall processes where we spend years planning a tech refresh, how do you ever hope to adapt in competition?
But that's what we're doing now.
That's right. Well, this is the problem.
Help us liberate ourselves from this.
So much of it is going to go back to, there's two principles. And Congressman, you introduced, so one, we've talked a little bit about ATOs already. That's one. The other principle you just brought up is this notion of vendor lock. One, I want to point out that an ATO is another mechanism via which one can achieve vendor lock. We're beginning to see this already. Some companies get a continuous ATO, and then they seek to use that to lock themselves in because it's so expensive. Companies can spend $1 million just getting through an ATO process. But there are a set of principles, and these are known as the MOSA principles. And actually, Congress put these in place, and Ms. Lord oversaw a number of efforts. But these are poorly used. What MOSA principles do is they say the program manager, who's in charge of the acquisition, shall define modules and interfaces and make those interfaces available to qualified contractors, to the government. And what this does is this allows other companies to come along, they see the data, they see the interface, and they can make new software that works with that. If the government has the right infrastructure, it can figure out how to test this and make sure that it works effectively in context. So the principles exist. In fact, put in law, they're just poorly adopted.
Well, yeah, because people are protecting their turf. I greatly appreciate that. I've got further questions for you, Dr. Murray, about AI and hypersonics, but I see my time's expired, and so I'll be submitting those for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Slotkin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I was at the Pentagon for 7 years, and in the 5-ish years that I've been here, we've done a ton of hearings that kind of look at this issue from one way or another, just our cultural problem of speeding up decision-making, particularly as it relates to tech. And to the point where I feel like, to use a Pentagon term, we're admiring the problem. Like, we love a hearing about it. And actually, there's deep bipartisan agreement on the need to spin up and to speed up that string on going from concept to fielding of a technology of any kind, obviously software being some of the most complicated. And it has led me to believe, even as someone who cares deeply about the Pentagon and our national security, that it's not, any one program or any one authority. It's truly culture across administrations, culture across leaders. And I'm not like a burn it down kind of person, saying like, okay, the system doesn't work, so we need to destroy it and start from zero. But if separating yourself from the tech, if you could make, and some of you have served inside the Pentagon, if you could be queen or king for the day, on one cultural change, what would that be? And I would say, aware of the fact that the Pentagon has a lot of rules and restrictions when they use taxpayer dollars that Google and Silicon Valley and everyone else doesn't have to adhere to. The responsibility of stewarding those dollars is different than a small startup in Palo Alto. It's never going to be the same thing. That comparing the two is apples to oranges. But speaking from culture, as people who have been either in the inside or adjacent, what's the one thing you would change, starting with Ms. Lord?
I would ask leadership to demonstrate that smart risk management benefits the warfighter and the nation. Therefore, I believe there are many more motivations and rewards that can be given to those individuals, whether civilians or in uniform, who lean forward and take smart risks. They manage risk, they don't try to eliminate it, and they move at the speed of need here. And I believe that leadership needs to speak up and make rewards and highlight those individuals who are doing the right thing, and recognize that people will falter, and not to blame them, if you will, when everybody's looking for perfect being the enemy of good enough.
Yeah, I certainly know in Silicon Valley, when I have the chance to visit, it's like people wear their mistakes as a badge of honor. I started a company, it didn't succeed, but I learned these important lessons, and now I'm on my third company, and look at all this amazing stuff. It was so strange as a Pentagon official to visit Silicon Valley and hear people talking about their failures, because of the Pentagon, you would never talk about your failures, right?
Well, and with all due respect, I think Congress has a piece of this.
For sure. For sure. Sir, we'll just go down the line here, Mr. Murray.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think you're right. Changing that culture is going to be hard, and how do we do it? I think there are lots of things we could do. If I could, sort of be king for a day, I think one of the things I would do is change the way we think about the teams of people that are working on software. If you look at what happens in Silicon Valley or other places, you see a lot of this turnover, right? People are not there for 10, 20, 30 years doing this, right? They come in for 2 years, they do this part, they go out, they start another company, they go another place. How do we take advantage of the commercial sector, bring them into government for a short period of time, put them in a position that is skipping a couple of GS levels and other things, because they're super talented, they know what to do, we get them in there. I think they'll help change that culture, because they'll ask why. Why are we doing it this way? Why don't we do it this way? I know how to do it that way. So I think that's what I would do, right? We have to change the culture. We're not going to change the culture by just taking the people who are there and saying change. I think we do that by bringing people in who look different and think about things differently, right? And that is one way to do it.
Great. And very quickly in my remaining time, Dr. Pratt.
Yeah, I think fostering a culture of doers is really the key here, which is encouraging the accountability down to an individual program manager for the outcomes they achieve. When you run a decades-long development and you only serve in a position for a few years, it's very hard to have a sense of accountability or responsibility or pride in the outcomes that get delivered. But if the great thing about software is you can compress these delivery timelines, and suddenly you can start to celebrate this. And combined with the suggestion that Dr. Murray just made of bringing in people for short tours of duty from commercial industry, I think you can get a vibrancy and dynamism in the perspective and talent to drive to results.
Thanks very much for my time. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. McCormick, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to start. It's fascinating. I love the variety of questions. It's kind of been all over the map, and you guys have been such great subject matters experts. I'm going to go a little off the chart of things I was supposed to ask today, because I'm fascinated by this topic. And we have a couple doctors in technological fields. I'm a doctor in medicine. And it's interesting to watch how AI has been developed and how it's taken these columns, very similar to the way the brain is. This is kind of fascinating for the kids out there, and how AI is developed in different parts of your brain affect different parts of your body. Specifically, it's designed for this part of the brain for your arm, this part for your leg, this part for your eyesight, this part for your hearing, this is your decision-making, this is your personality. And we've done the same thing in AI, since we can no longer rely on Moore's law to shrink the size of these chips. And there's one atomic structure of thinness per layer, which is fascinating to me, that we can actually design software to go into this hardware and fit into these capacities to do specific functions just like we do in our brain. It's fascinating that after all this technology and all this science, we're getting back to the way that God designed the brain. It's fascinating to me. My question is, and this is for my two technology experts, is as we do this and we're designing software to match the hardware, and we're going forward, and AI accelerates that process, how does it affect cybersecurity and our enemies' ability to combat us, and how do we unleash that potential as we design the software going forward?
I'll give it a start. So, as I said earlier, I think it is hard for us to predict the impact that AI is going to have. It's clear it's going to be huge, and we have to figure out how to take advantage of that. Our adversaries are going to take advantage of that, and so if we're not on the front end of that, right, we're in trouble. I think one of the things we have to do is start saying we need to be using AI to design software. We need to be using AI to test software. We need to be using AI to try and attack software internal to what we're doing, right? Where is that happening now, right? What are the AI programs that are saying, hey, we write code with AI, we test code with AI and other things? Why? Because if we're not smart at that, right, we're not going to be able to take advantage as that technology goes so quickly. It's fascinating, I think, because AI is one of those areas. I heard a talk by John Hennessy, former president of Stanford, and he said AI is one of those areas where the developers of the technology were legitimately surprised by what it could do. They didn't know that it would be able to code. They didn't know it would be able to do these things. It's amazing, right, to have that. John Hennessy's been involved in a lot of things, but it did what they designed it to do. AI is something that truly is moving faster than we thought it would move. I think it's going to be huge. I think the DoD needs to take advantage of that. I think we ought to be asking, where are the AI efforts that are happening in use of large language models for coding and other things?
And Dr. Pat, before you get started, one of the things I also want you to consider as a university kind of guy, too, Georgia Tech has 3 different columns of AI development, but we also have 250,000 students from India just alone here in the United States studying. We got a ton of kids from China studying. And we have all of our AI production over in Taiwan at TSMC, right? So we have production overseas. We have our technologies going back overseas. That's another consideration I want to, how do we protect this stuff from being used against us when we're training those people and producing the chips overseas in a nation that's, we said we're going to take over? I'm just concerned about the security measures of that.
An important question. The complexity of our software and our hardware and the co-design is absolutely exploding. I will say, though, that you can use this complexity as a tool. For example, one of the things you can do is you can create a chip, you can produce the hardware, and then you can set features of it later. You can defer some of that, and you can build in forms of defense. But at the same time, I don't think it's possible to prevent all vulnerabilities beforehand. This is one of the reasons why being able to go back and drive updates, detect anomalies, detect problems, and drive updates is so important. And we begin to see this now, for example, in some of the Navy operational networks of automated anomaly detection, and then they're able to go push a patch before any users see a problem. So tools like this of figuring out how to use this exploding complexity that we see to the advantage of the U.S. is how we stay ahead.
Okay, thank you. And I just, Ms. Lord, I'm going to just kind of push that question back on you again. Once we always talk about securing our software as we develop. We're the leaders in technology as far as developing software, but we don't create our own hardware when it comes to AI. How do we protect our technologies from the bad guys?
I think what we have to do is look at this from both a defensive and offensive point of view. And it's absolutely critical that we have standards that are held to when we look at the system level, that we also understand the provenance of all hardware and software that we include. Right now, we don't always understand the beneficial ownership of some of the companies in our supply chain. And frankly, AI has done an incredible job in illuminating supply chains, just scraping publicly available information to really understand where items began. So the Department of Defense has begun to put some contracts in place to use that technology, and cybersecurity standards are already to some degree in the acquisition policies, but that needs to be followed up on.
Thanks, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Mr. Ryan, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here, and really appreciate your input and also your service in many various hats to the country. Despite my desire to ask about TikTok, I'm not gonna do that this morning. I'm sure many in our audience would be curious, myself included. I want to follow up on my colleague Ms. Lotkins' sort of line of questioning and something specifically you said, Ms. Lord. You started to say Congress has a role in this discussion about culture and risk, changing the risk sort of appetite, if you will, and tolerance. Could you talk a little bit more about that, any specific ideas you have, and we'll turn it to others too?
Absolutely. I think often it's easy to look at what has gone wrong in DOD and pound on that a little bit, if you will. But I think perhaps if thoughtful questions about what did you learn from this, how did it happen, how do we do things differently in the future, that line of discussion would be very useful. Also, I think asking questions about what is holding you back from taking more risks. And I think that there's an incredible fear of failure. And if you could engage senior leadership in the building relative to discussions about that and ask them how you motivate and reward them to act more like the commercial sector, where we do things quickly. We pull the patches, in a day or so. I think that would be really, really useful.
Just in setting up others to answer too, and somewhat leading, but is there, not to overly formalize it, but do you think it could ever make sense for there to be some more public or more broad assessment of which programs, which leaders, which individuals are accepting risks, sort of holding them up in a somewhat more formal way?
Absolutely. For years, when I was in the building, we talked about holding hearings to showcase these types of individuals. And I believe the reality is that scheduling does not allow you to do that type of thing. There are things like TikTok that you need to work about. To talk about and work on, but there is so much you can do just with recognition, with letters, with talking to the media, inviting people up to your office for an hour or so. Just doesn't cost much, would go a long way, and it would cast a very long shadow.
Thank you. Dr. Murray.
So, I think Congress does play a role in shaping the culture of the DoD, and it's the way you ask the questions, I think, in part, right? If you do something where you say, here are all the requirements, why didn't you meet these requirements, why is it over budget, et cetera, you are forcing us into a system in which we're looking at the requirements and checking all the boxes, and that may not be the right answer. If you look at speed and cycle time as your main metrics, and for software programs, that's what it is, how quickly can you get something out into the field? That's fantastic. Can we get a leaderboard going, to your point, right, where we sort of say, this program, right, they've got their sort of time down to 1 week or 2 weeks, why is it that they're doing better? Maybe we get people in a friendly competition, right, for saying we've got the best speed and cycle time, right? Can we make those things public? Can we say, here's how quickly these different software-dominated programs can get things out into the field and working?
Thank you. Love the leaderboard.
One of the most remarkable technological achievements is just how safe civil air travel is. It's remarkable how few fatalities come out of this. And the reason that it became so safe and so successful is there was a strong culture around a blame-free debrief, which is if you step forward and you talk about the problem, then it's about learning. It's not about failure. This is the same principle that we need to apply here as we figure out collectively how to do software right. Just to call out two specific examples, many of you have heard of this Air Force project called Kessel Run, which is about software delivery. Many of you have also heard about the Air Force's ABMS, the Advanced Battle Management System, that's run by PEOC-3BM in the Air Force, General Cropsey. Both of those efforts are efforts which did deep, hard introspection about their early efforts. And they said, you know what? We need to pivot. The early choices that we made around architecture and how to approach this, or how we think about managing this effort, aren't right, and we need to pivot. Those are the kinds of people, the kind of decision, and that sort of blame-free culture, that focus on learning that you need to make this work.
I appreciate that, and I think just with the 20 seconds I have left, I think recognizing that that has to start from the very, very top and has to be a principle of all the senior leadership is just something that I think we can hopefully all agree. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Yield back the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Khanna, closing statement.
I just want to thank the excellent witnesses and your very concrete recommendations, and appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you again as well. Coming in, shedding light and amplifying information of, again, we've talked about it. We learn more from our failures than we ever will our successes. To your point, sir, in the military, we often never spoke about how well the operation went. We always talked about how horrible the small things were in order to capitalize that on the next op. I've been sitting back here trying to, I think I have it, but I'm not going to say it out loud. I think I know why, the reason why we're so risk adverse in the House of Representatives. And I'll keep that with myself since I'm on TV right now. But my colleagues and I will definitely discuss that behind closed doors. Try to fit. But again, thank you. So members will have 5 business days to submit their questions for the record. This committee is now adjourned.